All right, today I want to start talking about JavaScript. And those of you who've been bored because there's no logic involved in HTML, not much. All right, here we go again, back to programming. And for most of you, this is programming language number 3. All right, for some of you, number 12, but it doesn't matter. And we're going to go through that process of how do I learn a new language, what are the steps. Again, we went through them for those of you in the Swift class, we went through them there, but for those of you not in the iOS class, we're going to go through the same process here. First thing we need to learn how to do is how do I add JavaScript to my page. All right, so one of the first things we want to do is put in some embedded JavaScript. I normally put my JavaScript right here in the head tag if I'm experimenting. Those of you in the iOS class, Wenderlich says, try some stuff in the playground, and when it's ready there, then move it. Most of my JavaScript is stored offline in a separate file. We'll be doing that here very, very quickly, but not in this initial example here. It is possible to have, if it's small amounts of JavaScript, have it actually embedded right inside your HTML. Normally I put it external. So to embed it, steal my copy here, we want to type a script, and the type is text JavaScript. So we need a script tag, type equals txt JavaScript. And an end script tag. And now inside here, we can define all kinds of variables, we can define functions. It's kind of like a playground for those of you in the iOS class, except we don't get to see the results right away without running the page. It's like a little mini program stuck inside there. In JavaScript, you put comments in with either slashes or /stars. Just noticed when I was browsing through my notes last hour that I still have a lot of VB references in here. I'm trying to remove those, I think. I think Tim and maybe Sheila can relate to them, but most everybody else is C# trained, so it's time to remove those. But still a lot of consistency here between the languages, particularly the curly bracket languages. So let's just throw a quick comment in here. And notice we get color coding in Notepad++. And you can do multi-line just like before. If you don't want to type these, I don't blame you. But again, when you're learning a new language, it's how do I do comments in this language? I go back to VB and I start typing / and it doesn't work there. In VB, it's apostrophes.
REM.
REM? No, I don't use REM anymore for remark. That used to be the way you do it. All right. In addition to embedded JavaScript, which is what we'll play with for a little while here, we can also create a link to an external file. Notice it's still a script style, a tag. It's still two-sided. You just designate a source, and the source is very similar to an HTML or an href source. Abbreviated SRC, and then whatever file you want. I normally put a JS on the end of my JavaScript file by name. Notepad++ recognizes them as JavaScript files if you do that. You still have to designate a path. What I mean here is if it's in a folder, like a JavaScript folder, or I think some of you have been using script folders, that's great. But you have to designate that here. And then if you have pages that are embedded inside your pages folder that need to get to the JavaScript folder, they need to do the ... thing, and then the JavaScript folder, all those relative paths that we learned about in the web links unit still apply here.
With the go subcommand.
With the go, no go subcommands either. Okay, we can mix and match these. So you can have some embedded, I don't normally do this, but you can have some embedded JavaScript and then also have a link to a JavaScript file all at the same time. And this is a lot more common. You can import multiple JavaScript files into the same page. So I need that JavaScript, I call them libraries. I need that JavaScript file, which is a library. It probably has a bunch of functions in it. I need that one too, and I need this one. You bring them all in and use them all at once. The JavaScript doesn't have to be in the head tag. You can embed JavaScript by using a script tag just like this. You can actually put it down in the body. That's pretty rare for JavaScript, though it can be done. Embed it down in the body. If you do that, however, then Firebug, which you're going to learn about a little bit later, Firebug won't stop at the breakpoints. Biggest challenge with writing JavaScript in a browser like this using a text document editor like Notepad++ is how do I debug this? Well, there's lots of techniques we could use, but the easiest technique is to include the Firebug browser add-on. It's a Firefox browser add-on. It's the Firebug. And it provides you a little window down at the bottom that allows you to debug and check your variables and and have a console output if that's what you want to debug your JavaScript. So there's a lab for that. Whenever you're bored, you can get started on it, but we won't need it just for a little while yet. We have to get a little more comfortable with JavaScript before we start debugging. So that's available to you as well. JavaScript, like all the other curly bracket languages, is case sensitive. Has a bunch of built-in functions that we're going to be using and some built-in classes that we're going to be using. You have to capitalize them all properly. This is obviously for my VB students a long time ago, where those three variable names, myvar and myvar and myvar, were all the same in VB. Not for us. You're all used to the capitalization being different. Even though this is legal to have three different variables with the same name that are capitalized differently, it's about as confusing as it gets for a maintenance programmer to keep all that straight. So even though you can do that, I don't recommend it. All JavaScript statements end in a semicolon, so you Swift programmers are going to have to get used to putting those back in again. Multi-statement blocks, like all the other curly bracket languages, are surrounded by curly brackets. We already talked about comments. Next thing we need to know, how do we declare a variable? In JavaScript, variables are automatically typed. It's very similar to the implicit type in Swift, except for one thing. In Swift, you can't change the type. So once you put a string in a variable, you can't later put a number in there. JavaScript has no such rule. You can declare a variable, put a number in there, then put a string in there, then put it back to a number again, whatever you want to do. And it's not terribly uncommon to do that, because we will often grab text out of a text box, convert it into a number, and put it into a variable. So we'll grab the text, put it into a variable, then take that number, that variable, and convert it to an actual number and put it right back in the same variable again, so it changes type. And that's legal in JavaScript. Variable names, letters, digits, underscores, like most other languages, and add a $, which is kind of bizarre. $signs are typically reserved for special system type functions. We don't use them a lot in our own, though you can if it helps you. And we will actually use it briefly in one example. But I don't typically use that. Like all other curly bracket languages, you can't start with a digit. You have to start with a letter or an underscore or a $, just so JavaScript can tell your variable names from numbers. If it starts with a number, it thinks it's a number. Okay. Still think it's a good idea to put a variable description on there, particularly if your variable names are lame. I still use camel case. Completely up to you whether you put those things on there this semester for me. Mathematical operators, same as C#. Plus, minus, divide, multiplication, modulus. Here's a kicker. In C# right now, my programming logic students are fighting with integer division. In most curly bracket languages, if you divide one integer by another, you get an integer. And if there's decimal places in the answer, they're just discarded. Not in JavaScript. In JavaScript, if you divide an integer 2 by 5, you get 0.4. Well, what if I want it to be an integer and chopped off and stuff? Then you parse it. Okay? So you don't convert it necessarily to an integer, you parse it to an integer. That's a little bit different than the other languages we've seen where you can cast types. Well, here there's no types to cast. Notice there is no int. You cannot say make this variable an int. The way you make it an int is by sticking an int in it. To declare a variable in JavaScript, you simply say var. It's a variable. and it's extra variable because it can be anything. So there's no typecasting because there's really no types. So what we have to tell JavaScript to do is take this equation, when you're done with it, parse it into an integer. And when you do that, all the decimal places are lopped off. We'll see why here in just a second. JavaScript has a math class that includes a floor function if you want to round down, a ceiling function if you want to round up, and a round function if you want to round to a certain number of decimal places. Plus plus, minus minus are all available. And I still don't think it's a good idea for you to embed those inside of other statements except for loops. The shortcut operators are also available. There's probably, I haven't tested a modulus equals, not something I use a whole lot. Concatenation, use a plus sign just like C#. If I'm saying stuff here you don't remember or you don't relate to, I'm going fast because this is language number 3. We've already been through this once this semester. You probably remember it from C#. And all you lab assistants are going, yep, I remember it now. I had to look it up real quick. Order of precedence, pretty much the same, but this is a pretty expanded order of precedence list. Oh. There. This is the not sign, the logical not. So it has a higher order of precedence than everything else, the plus plus and the minus minus and the unary minus sign, meaning -12. Those have high precedence. Then multiplication, division, modulus, addition, subtraction. But remember from C#, there's also the relational operators, but they have a lower order of precedence than math. So if you're saying A plus B is less than C plus D, perfectly legal. All the addition gets done first, and then the relational operators. Finally, after relational come assignment, and that's not even a finally. I'm sorry, these are not assignment operators. These are comparison operators. But equality is a lower level of precedence than less than. Weird, but normally you don't mix them anyways. These get done first, and then all the compound conditions, and, or. This is an inline if. Notice its order of precedence is way low, so all the math is done, all the comparisons are done, then the inline if. And then finally all the assignment operators. So assignment is done last, which is kind of what we always expect. We just never really talked about it. John?
How does JavaScript tell the difference between the unary minus sign and like a subtraction problem?
Minus, or magic. Based on the environment. Okay, if it's the first thing in front of a variable, like a minus age, for whatever reason, it sees that. It's where is it? It just parses it and says if it's attached to a number and there's no operator operand on the other side, must be unary.
Okay.
Okay, and you can even do weird things like A plus -C. Now you got a plus sign and a minus sign kind of right next to each other. It sorts them out somehow. Magic. It's a compiler's job. We don't have to worry about it. Like C#, JavaScript does not have an exponentiation operator raised to the power. So we can use the math class, has a pow function built into it. This is 2 raised to the 3rd. There's a random number generator in there, and a whole bunch of others if you need them, but I think I've talked about the important ones. Round, power, if you need it, and random. Otherwise, I don't get too much into the math functions, but you may get some kind of a linear equation that needs logarithmic functions and what, they're all in there. Just go look them up if you like. There is no date type, just like in C#, right? But there is a date class, and you simply instantiate it. Pretty similar to what we did in C#, except there it's date time, and here it's simply date. This instantiates a new date and sets it to the current date and time when you instantiated it. If you want to initialize it to a date of your choice, put the date in strings. There's initiator, a constructor built into the date class that accepts a date string. I'd put in a short date format. We're going to talk about dates here in just a minute. They throw me for a big loop. But you can try putting dates in other formats. It might recognize them. But if you're hard coding them, you might as well put them in that format. Some other date methods, things we can do to my date. We can convert it to a string. Unfortunately, it returns an ugly string like October 16 and then some date time out here, and it's ugly. If we want it formatted differently, then we have to tell it otherwise. Utc String does a nice job of converting dates properly. There's a problem with converting dates. We're talking websites here. We're talking web pages here. What date are we talking about? When we say take this date, we go around the world, there's a lot of different time zones, and everybody could be looking at your page, and that causes all kinds of grief in JavaScript. The UTC string is the universal time format type thing. I think it's time conversion. I forget what that stands for. But it does a pretty decent job of converting a string to a date. Actually, a date to a string, pardon me. Because what it does is it removes any special Greenwich Mean Time stuff that gets thrown in there and puts it back into what time zone are you in. Dates give me headaches in JavaScript. We can say my date, give me the year, my date, give me the month, my date, give me the day. Date, excuse me, that's the day of the month. If we want to add, we use the setDate function. And this is kind of bizarre. Get the date, so that's the day of the month. Add 15 to it. And then put it back in at setDate. That's confusing to me because setDate to me implies the entire date, but that's not what date means here in JavaScript. Date is the day of the month. Okay. So this says set the day of the month, which right now for us would be the 12th, right? 13th. Okay. This says get the date, which is the 13th, add 15 to it, that's the 28th, and then put it back in here. This, for us, would return October 28th.
Does that go across months?
Yeah. The setDate function knows how to deal with all that stuff. So you can add 60 days, and it'll figure it out. And you can also subtract, and it'll figure it out. And I believe you can also do a set month and go 2 months forward, but what happens, or 1 month forward, what happens if it's January 1st? What's 1 month forward? Figures it all out. Notice this is not an assignment, this is an in-place change. This changes the date. Remember your setters and getters in C#. Right? We're using a setter here to change the contents of this variable without assigning it to a new variable. I have created an import date function. So we'll learn how to import that. We don't have to really import it. We simply include the file that has that function in it, the JavaScript file that has that function in it. And then you can say mydate.format and use M's and D's and Y's and all kinds of stuff to format your dates however you want to spit them out. We'll take a look at that a little bit later. I don't think I've bypassed anything I'm supposed to be doing here. This is just kind of overview. And this is the dates make me crazy stuff. Depending on how you enter the date in a text box. And what we have to do is take a look at what do the date types, the input types, what kind of date do they return? I believe it's an ISO date. Okay. And if they return an ISO date, there's an ISO date. And if we entered the date of 2011, 11/15, i.e. 9 returns 11/14, 6 o'clock. Because that's how far away we are from Greenwich Mean Time. Firefox does basically the same thing. Chrome. Opera doesn't. So now the date conversion things behave differently in different browsers. I think I've gotten a way figured out to deal with that, but it isn't easy. Because the browsers are trying to say, well, you want this date, but it's Greenwich Mean Time, so it's really not this date. It's this date minus 6 hours. And if this class was in the morning or in the afternoon, all of a sudden it starts changing dates on us. I didn't even see this for 2 years because my web programming class, like this one, was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so it was always the right date. And then we had a late class of 4 to 6 and add 8 hours to 6, and you're at 2 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden at the end of class it was mangling my dates. If you put a time on it, then it behaves a little bit differently, notice. If you, with hours, and it's just, it makes me crazy. Right? If you enter the date this way, then it leaves it alone. What's that about? If you enter it this way, seems to leave it alone. Slashes seems to leave it alone. What's annoying to me is the international date format, ISO, is the one that it seems to mangle the most. And what we end up doing behind the scenes is let the user type it in international format. If they do, we're going to take all the slashes out, or all the dashes out, and put in slashes instead. And then the dates are treated properly. But it's annoying. And this one's interesting. You can't type this. You get invalid in Firefox, and I think that's Opera. Yeah. Weird stuff. So when we type an international date format like this, it seems to imply Greenwich Mean Time. JavaScript, the browser, automatically converts your current time to Greenwich Mean Time, and if it's the wrong time of day, you get some weird results sometimes. I don't think we're supposed to be using dates. That's weird.
What does it do with date pickers?
What date pickers?
Like on
You mean the date type?
Well, like in Chrome when it uses the
Right.
actual
That's a date type input is what you're talking about,
Yes.
right? I believe those return an ISO format.
So
I thought there was, let me go check real quick, because I thought there was something in my notes that talked about what those return. So where's my forms? Forms, JavaScript. Can't find anything here. There it is. And I come down here, and then there's the input type, and I had some comments here. Where's the date? Color, email, URLs, times, months, dates. My comments are pretty lame because they don't tell me what type is returned, though here's probably a Chrome example. Notice it's written with slashes. If it returns that actual text value to the JavaScript, and it probably would when we ask for it, then it's fine, because that's the one that doesn't mess your dates up. It's when it's an ISO format that you get messed up. So this one seems to be okay, and that's something we can test here in just a minute. Let's test it now. I'm going to go into my form here, or my body of my HTML that we're playing around with here, and I'm going to put in a form, and I'm going to keep it fairly simple. Method, wasn't it? Method equals post, action equals nothing. Probably don't even need all of that. I'm making this up as I go, and then I'm going to create an input type. So we'll add a label to it. I'm not even going to put a for loop on, or a for on it. Enter date. And then do an input type equals date. In order to get at it from JavaScript, it has to have an ID. I'm not going to send this anywhere, so I'm not going to give it a name, but I'm going to give it an ID equals sample date. And so there's my input. I'm going to save that and do a quick run in Firefox on this just so I can see what it looks like. I could just, heaven forbid, launched it in IE. And actually, I don't want Firefox, do I? I could. Firefox will just give me a text box. I really want to launch it in as Chrome. And I think I might have by accident. Who am I? Is that Chrome? I thought Chrome gave me, oh, there's the date picker. Okay. And so there's the slashes, 15, there's the date. And now what I want to know, I'm going to add a submit button to this. Actually, I think I'm going to pause this. What I want to know is what does that turn into when JavaScript looks at it? Okay. So what I really need is a submit button and a couple of other things. So to start playing around, I just probably should have even just skipped this. I'm going to close this one. And I'm going to go open my evaluation form starter that I have in my folder that you downloaded. Okay, this is the evaluation form folder. And there's the eval form. Drop it in here. And notice it's got a couple of starters for us here. And this is why I wanted to bring it in, because it already has an on submit. And it already has a form, and it's kind of formatted. I should put all this external, but it's there, so I'm just going to leave it. Just it kind of gets in my way, but I can collapse it. There we go. And this just has a form. Take a quick look. Run it in Chrome. Chrome Portable might not have been the best idea, but we'll go with it. Okay, so I don't have a date time type in here, so we'll put one in. We'll turn this into a date picker. Right now it's just text. But what I now also have is a submit button and some JavaScript that says when the submit button is clicked, do this. So according to this right now, it displays an alert. An alert is just a message box. So I'm just going to go back to my live version here and click submit and see what happens. I get an alert. I'm in on submit. So there's our first event. JavaScript can respond to events, and a couple of very common ones are window onload. Window onload is basically form load. You can put stuff in there to change the appearance of the form based on the current date, based on whatever you want to do. Remember, we had that in our previous edition of the forms that we were building to reset for Firefox. We'll explain what that means here in just a minute. But here's the on submit. I'm going to remove this alert. I'm going to just comment it out. And underneath here, I'm going to do a document.writeLine. It's kind of like a console write line that we've seen in other languages, print line and Swift, where it just spits something out. In this case, because of where this is and where it happens, it wipes out the page and just displays whatever text we put in there. So I want to display, let's just test that real quick. Here's my message, semicolon. Save that, and once again, check to make sure in my browser it does. Watch what it does. It wipes out the page. Oops, let's refresh. Wipes out the page. If you want that document write line to actually do something in the middle of the page, then you have to put your JavaScript in the middle of the page. But even then, a document write line doesn't work very well. So we have to be careful. But there's my message. So I can use this for testing since I'm not quite up yet for, why can't I hit the back button?
It's got the same URL.
So we refresh. Okay, thank you. So now that's in there. Now I want to play with these date types a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is declare a date. A date. It's a variable. And I'm going to set that equal to a new date, semicolon. And then according to my notes, which are now hiding or closed, there they are. According to my notes, other notes, there is a date format. This is the one we have to import for. We'll do that in a second. In the meantime, toDate string probably will be just fine for us. So we're going to display using toDate string. Who's in the back? Green, is this big enough for you?
Yes.
Anybody else need it bigger? Okay. So in here, the date value is, and then I can concatenate a date dot, forgot the syntax already, toDate string. Before you get too carried away, let me check it. Save that. here, and right now my message box doesn't care about anything on the form, so I just want to submit. Monday, October 13th. So far it's okay. But again, if you back up 8 hours, it's still the 13th. If you go ahead 8 hours, it's still the 13th. But if this was a 4 to 6 class, right around 4 o'clock, 4:01, this changes into a previous date or the next date or something like that, and it just messes me up big time. But that's how we manipulate the dates. What we can't see is what happens if we put in different formats because of the time of the day that we're at here. So I can come in here and say, where's my JavaScript? Come in here and say, instead of just a date, let's say that we want Christmas. Notice if you don't put anything in, you get the current date. So there's no today function built in. If you want the current date time, you simply instantiate a date. And it, by default, is instantiated with the current date and time when that command was executed. Save it, come back in here, press the submit button again, and now I have that date.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Let's try the UTC string instead and see what we get. So it's to UTC string. And let's see if I F5 and submit. According to this, it's 6 a.m. Okay, it's because it's backing up about 8 hours from now. Actually, it's backing up 6 hours from now because we didn't give it a time, so the time is 0. Let's go back one more time and use today and the current time to see what we get. It says that it is currently October 13th, 1939. That's not the year, that's the time. Military types can help you out. There's plenty of them in the room. 7:39, that's 5 hours from now. And if you run this at the wrong time because you're doing your homework assignment at 9 o'clock at night, all of a sudden the date says it's the 14th, or the date says it's the 12th, or I can never keep it straight. It goes ahead. So you have to be a little careful with these, depending on what you put in there. Let's try, according to my notes, if I put the UTC, or if I put in a date in here that is in ISO format, 2014, 10/13. I didn't put a time on it. So what I expect to happen here, it's going to go backwards in time. Because it thinks it's 5 o'clock now. It's not. It's 5 hours earlier. So it's going backwards, and it might give me the 12th. I hope it gives me the 12th, just so you can see this happening. Darn. Oh, that's UTC. I'm sorry. It formats properly. It figured it out. But if we go back to the other two date string, am I confusing you yet? I'm confused. Finally, if you use two date string to convert your dates into strings, the browser automatically adjusts the date to Greenwich Mean Time. And because I didn't specify a time, the time is 0. We are 5 hours behind Greenwich Mean Time, so actually it's, if you want the 13th, really, that's still the 12th, considering the current time. And this just boggles my mind. So there's a couple of solutions to the problem. One is to recognize that using two date strings is not a good idea. You might be better off using two UTC string, and then it normally leaves your date alone. So don't two string it. To date string it, just UTC string it. Another way to deal with it, and I'm not even going to take questions because I don't know. It's always never off by more than one, but it's always off when you don't specify a time. And you use a two date string to do the formatting. Another alternative is to use my format function. So I'm going to go open that up here if I can find it. In that folder that you downloaded, in the evaluation form, it's not there. I thought it was. Nope. Thought I put it in there. So we'll have to go find it. Volker tools, basically, for JavaScript. So I'm going into my browser. And I'm going back to OneDrive. And on OneDrive in the web programming class is the current version of Volker tools for web programming. Actually, I'm going to jump real quick here to web data management, see if there's a newer version there. There's not. Occasionally I forget to put it in here. So it looks like the latest version of this is dated the 13th of November, or 2013 November. You can download that. I would download it inside the evaluation form folder. So here's my Unit 8 done. I'm going to the evaluation form folder and I'm going to save it there. And unzip it when I get there. There it is. Unzip. Once you've got it, we got a link to it. What do you mean it doesn't exist anymore? Oh. Moved it, forgot to change its name. What? To link to it, just create another one of these JavaScript tags. You can just steal it if you want to. I'm typing it. We need a source. Equals, from where my file is, this eval form file. I'm going to go take a look around. Where is it really? I'm in here. No, I'm in here, and the file's gone. Where did it go? I must have deleted it. So I'll save this one in that spot. Where did that go? Hopefully to the same spot. There we go. All right. Here's the file. So I want to get some JavaScript from in here. So I'm going to have to put the folder name in there first, and the folder name's got spaces and dashes and stuff, and all that's perfectly legal. So that's Volker tools. So in my source here, I'm going to put Volker tools. That doesn't have a space. 2013 11/24 was it? 11/21. There is a space there, but there isn't here. If you don't like the spaces, rename it. I only put dates on them so that you can tell that you have the most recent version. Especially last year, I was having issues keeping track of which one was current and which one are you using. Are you using the current one or are you using the older one? All of my JavaScript files internal have dates on them as well. But this is the entire folder. If you don't want to type all that stuff, just take it out. You can rename the folder once you've downloaded it. 21. And I'm going to want a file in there. Like what? Here's a bunch of JS files. Those are my tools. Instead of putting them all into one big Volker tools JS file that is hard to manage and hard to scroll through and hard to see, and I've separated them out. Okay. What this also does is it documents which functions you are using. The downside to putting them all in one big file is that every time you want to use my isDate function, which is 4 lines long, basically, you have to bring in all this other stuff, and the key press events are huge, and some of the other ones are very large. And if I put them all into one big file, every one of those characters comes along with your browser. But there's all kinds of things that can slow browsers down when they're bringing in your page. Big images and big JavaScript files where you're not using much. So I've separated these out. And if you need random numbers, then you go get the random number one. If you need dates like we do, then you go get the date one. So it's called isDate.js. And then an end script tag with nothing in between. Now that's a Boolean function that asks, is it a date? We can look inside there. There's no secrets here, so I can open that up. Just drag this into Notepad, and it will tell me that here's the function. There's more comments here than anything else. This is a function called isDate. We'll talk about functions in the next unit, but it accepts a string. You send it a string, and it tries to turn that string into a date. If it fails, we will get one of two results. Either an invalid date, meaning it's not on the calendar, or that's not even a number. Send it the word Justin, and it will return NaN, not a number. Okay. Or it will return invalid date. And so I return true or false. If it's neither one of these, it's not a number, and it's not an invalid date, then it must be a valid date. So this is just a true-false function that returns true or false. Whatever you sent it is a date. In addition to looking at that, I also want to look at my date format. This one I stole. The other one I kind of wrote with some input from other places. But here's date format. Oh my goodness, what is all that stuff, and how do I sort it out? Ugh. What does all that mean? You can study it at your leisure, but what I normally do is document the heck out of these things. Here's a sample call. Any date, a date like we have, you can dot format it. So what I've done here is extended, some of you found this in Swift, I've extended the date class. I've given it a capability it didn't initially come with. The ability to format using formatting codes. So it does some fancy stuff here to figure out how to take that date, and it better be a date, because if it's not a date, this chokes on it. Okay. And it formats it, and it takes it apart, and you can even format with minutes and seconds. This one kind of flips around what happens in C#. In C#, the capital M's are months because they're bigger, and the little m's are minutes. Here, they're the other way around. Don't like it? Recode it. Take all the little m's out, make them capitals, all the big m's out of here, and make them little m's, and it'll work. And there's some predefined formats: short date, medium date, long date, ISO date. And finally down here we get to the meat, and here's the function itself. This says change the prototype for the date class. Add a format function that accepts a mask, which is the code, the formatting code, and then you call the date format function with that code. I mean, all of that could have been buried in here, but this is what actually changes the date class. So it's something you can steal later if you wish for your own classes, to modify them with some of the built-in classes. So let's play with that one a little bit. First we have to bring it in. So I'm going to copy my script tag, paste it in here, and instead of isDate, I think it was called date format or format date, date format. I would capitalize it properly. What some people do is they get a list of their favorite 8 that they're using all the time, and they just comment out the ones they're not using right now. So you're not bringing in any extra text. JavaScript files are just pure text. When they come in, they're raw text. You can look at them, you can edit them, but they do take up space when you add them to a web page like this. What happens on the server is the server sees this and it says, oh, he wants that file and this file as well. The server attaches those basically to your web page and sends them along. So the JavaScript actually comes along.
When you write comments inside an HTML document, does that get sent along when client request
This one here?
web page?
Good question. I don't know. So you're questioning whether this or if I have lots of comments in my isDate, for instance. My gut feel is yes, it does. Because there are all kinds of little websites out there that compress. It's not called compress. I forget what it basically shrinks this down to the bare minimum number of characters. It strips out carriage returns. It strips out tabs and spaces that you don't need and makes this function, which is about all we got for isDate, one big old long line. Okay, so yes, my comments are probably taking up space when I bring them in. I would probably have another version of this file called the minimized or whatever it is, minimized isDate, that has no extra junk in it to make it even smaller. But this is a few hundred bytes. Okay, that isn't going to slow much down today. But if you're interested, that's what a lot of people do. Make this big, huge libraries, run them through the minimizers, save it, and then that's what they suck into their web page every time. If they need to edit it, they go out to the unshrunk versions, right, edit it there, and then run it through the minimizer again. I think the minimizers that I've seen all take out comments and spaces and everything you don't need. All right, so we brought that in. Now how do we use it? Just right here, we can say format now. Format. And I don't want this date format, by the way, because it's the ISO date. That's the one that seems to get converted. So if I want Halloween, put that in there. And then I can format it any which way I want to, like month, full month, little day, full year. Oh. What happened? Oh, I think this is a different file now, maybe. All of a sudden it's submitted. Did I end up losing some code here? On submit. Eval form HTML in the eval form folder in the JavaScript done. That's where I am. Why is the submit button all of a sudden bypassing the submit?
Will it be in the form?
But it wasn't doing that before. All right, well, I'm going to pause the recording and I'll figure that out, and then we'll come back and play some more with dates.